a little more off the beaten path. There's discussion of a new state constitutional convention. Would you support that idea?
Well, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed in the Constitution. I haven't looked at it in depth, but my first reaction is that I'm concerned about a constitutional convention where I think there could be a very focused attempt by special interest groups to carve out protection that has not been afforded to them legislatively or in these tough and difficult times. Wouldn't be popular, but in the back room of a constitutional convention, they could try to carve out special interest language and protection that nobody as the voters would see or know the ramifications of for years to come. And when you vote on it in mass, would get lost in the huge shuffle. So I think individually fixing the problems by a vote of the people is preferable, because they can digest it and look at it, examine it, and see it specifically without having it lost in this huge document. Like they just introduced in Washington, this new budget bill for nationalized health care. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages. Somewhere buried in page 512 may be something that's terrible, and you may only get to page 500 if you're a working mom or a dad trying to read through and understand that, when the rest of your life is real busy trying to make ends meet and raise your children. So, I'd rather have them, our owners, if you will, of Michigan, our constituents, our taxpayers, have an opportunity to individualize their choice and their decision and say, I like this or I don't like that. That's kind of my first reaction.
Should we tweak Proposal A?
Well, Proposal A did a number of things, but I think you have to constantly, in government or in the private sector, look at what you're doing and make sure you're competitive. I mean, Proposal A was intended to do two things: to stabilize and reduce property taxes, and to ensure there was stable revenue for our education system, and to make sure that all children in Michigan were afforded an opportunity to quality education. All excellent, excellent goals. But in anything, you have to constantly go back and re-examine it and make sure that it's still meeting your goals. I think that, right now our tax system and our regulatory system is broken in Michigan. And I think we have to go back en masse and look at it. But in terms of those specific points, I think we need to keep that in mind, that we don't want property taxes to rise in Michigan. We don't want to drive people out of their homes. We don't want a system that fails us. And that was what was happening at the time. So, I'd be willing to look at a whole new tax and regulatory process, but the tweaking of Proposal A, if it's intended to raise taxes on people, is not something I'm interested in.
Where do you stand on legislative term limits?
I believe, actually, based on what I'm seeing in Lansing and how broke Lansing is, I would be calling for a part-time legislature.
Okay. That's certainly unique in the race thus far.
Yes, I think that Michigan is no longer even in the top 10 states in terms of population. We're one of the few handfuls in America that still has a full-time legislature, and coupling that with term limits, I think, has accelerated the dysfunctional character of Lansing, and Lansing's broken, and Michigan won't get back to work until we fix it. And one of the fixes that I would suggest is that we go to a part-time legislature.
And could folks serve 3 terms in that part-time legislature, or?
Well, I think, the public could look at different ways. Once you move it to a part-time, you could maybe, right now they can serve 6 years in the House and 8 in the Senate, an aggregate of 14 years. Maybe what you set it as a part-time legislature with no more than 12, period, wherever you serve. And that way they can get some stability and continuity if they stay in the same chamber, but they still can't serve more, actually serve less than they can serve in total now, but they get some stability, and they also reduce the cost, and we get in, we have a legislative session for 90 days and get out, and a call-out session for special purposes. Save a lot of money. A lot of the superfluous kinds of silliness that you see introduced in legislation about state this and state that and a special color carpet and all the kinds of things that we see them wasting money, because when you put a dollar amount for every one of those things, that's costing us all money, and it's taking focus off what we need to, and that is to bring jobs to Michigan. I mean, the bottom line for me is really this: I love what I'm doing. I have a great job. It's my dream job. And I'm in a spot in time where I get a fair amount of time with my family. But I also have 3 young kids. And I did not see anybody else that had all 3 of those components: the experience, the knowledge, and the backbone to fix a broken Lansing. And if we don't do that, our kids will continue to flee this state. And for us, that's unacceptable. I mean, if our kids want to leave the state to find their future, that's up to them. If they have to leave this state because they can't find a future, there's no jobs, that's a failure of leadership. And that's the primary reason I got into this, is my wife and I don't want to chase our 3 kids on a plane.
Right. Cobo Hall, the governor set aside some cash for Cobo Hall. The Detroit City Council rejected it, and then the legislature is now looking at maybe giving them a second opportunity. Would you have given them that cash in the first place? And is it important to save Cobo Hall? Would you give them a second chance?
Well, I think the Cobo legislation that was passed, it was a bipartisan, it was a regionalized piece of legislation. It was agreed to by Brooks Patterson, by the Macomb County Board Chair, by then Mayor Cockrell. All of those parties came together, Ficano, and said they can live with this. The revenues were raised in that region and funded Cobo. It was rejected by City Council. I think that was a mistake. You know, I think people have to come together. I think that's a regional facility, and supporting it by that region was the right thing to do. Having said that, I don't think, even with regional support, with regional tax money, it should be a blank check. There should be checks and balances, and I think Brooks Patterson and myself have been very clear on that it needs to be fiscally reasonable and stay very much within taxpayers' parameters. So, you know, they're getting a second chance at that, to have a regionally supported facility, but I don't think the whole state of Michigan should pay for a facility in that region.
What do you think of John Cherry?
John Cherry's a nice guy. I've served with him in the state senate, but you know, he's been in Lansing for decades, and Lansing's broken. And you know, John Cherry's Lansing. You know, he's lieutenant governor. He's been there. He's been part of this process for the last 6.5 years as lieutenant governor. And Lansing's not going to change with status quo, and I intend to break status quo. Michigan will get back to work when we fix Lansing.
One last question. Back in '06, we got to know some members of your family statewide.
Right.
How does the family feel about a second statewide run, and will we be seeing more of the Bouchard family?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely, you're going to see more of the Bouchard family, because the one thing that I will do is try to spend as much time on the road or wherever I am with them, because, again, that's what's most important to me, is my family. In terms of the whole process, no, I can't imagine any family is excited about this, because the first thing that happens is you get personally attacked, and people make things up, and it's not a fun experience for the kids and for the family. You know, myself, I've kind of become accustomed to being falsely attacked and things said about you. That's just the unfortunate way of the world. But your family, you hate to see in that crossfire. But they also believe, as do I, that unless good people are willing to step out and fight that fight, that things never change. And if our forefathers sat on the porch and said, well, we're not going to, you know, fight for freedom, this wouldn't be America. It'd still be a colony.
Sure. Thank you very much for the time.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.